in this country. 5 Liberal MPs are appealing to their leader, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, asking for a stronger response to the long-term care crisis in Canada. They each represent ridings in Ontario that are home to some of the facilities hardest hit by COVID-19. The MPs want the Prime Minister to demand a public inquiry in the province. They also want national standards implemented, and they wrote a letter to the Premier of Ontario as well, Doug Ford, asking for some specifics there. That's all on the heels of a report that came out earlier this week from the military that outlined just how deplorable the conditions in those homes actually are. Here's how the Prime Minister responded to the letter from those MPs just a bit earlier today.
There are a number of provinces across the country where, although there have been challenges, there are not nearly the scale of problems that we've seen in other places. So we recognize there is a great variance across the country, but as a federal government, our job is to look out for all Canadians and make sure that everywhere across the country people are supported, and we will be there depending on what the provinces need, what their situation is, to make sure that all seniors are protected.
So let's bring in 2 of the MPs who wrote those letters. Jennifer O'Connell is the MP for Pickering-Uxbridge, which is where the Orchard Villa care home is located. She joins us from Pickering. And Judy Sgro is the MP for Humber River Black Creek, which is where Hawthorne Place care home is located. She's in Toronto. Hi to both of you. Thanks for making time for us. Appreciate it.
Hi, Vasti. Thank you for your interest.
Ms. Sgro, why don't I start with you? Can you take us to the beginning. What compelled you? I imagine it's this report from the military, but when did you make the decision that you had to write a letter to both the Prime Minister and the Premier?
Within hours of receiving the report from our Canadian military outlining the disgusting answers that they seen and what they actually seen that was going on in Hawthorne Place in particular, there was no way could we not go into instant action. And one of my colleagues was, Gary was the initial one who called us all together. We put pen to paper immediately and had a letter going out that evening. It calls for immediate action because it's critically important. How we treat seniors and how we treat the most vulnerable in our country is a reflection of all of us as a society. And yes, this is a provincial responsibility for sure. And you can't just get off of it by saying you're not funding and you keep cutting it. Now things have come home to actually see how serious the problems are. And Premier Ford continues to think that, oh, it's more about just money. Well, I think it's not about just money. We need to have some standards that say this is the minimum amount of care and the minimum staffing levels and so on that would be in these homes to ensure that our most vulnerable seniors are taken care of in those places, which is why we want a national level of standard of care throughout the country, because I am sure that these 5 homes are just a sample of many, many others throughout the country of vulnerable seniors being left to dehydration, malnutrition, not changing the linens for them. I mean, it's just terrible. And I think it just drove the 5 of us that we absolutely had to do something. And so we want the federal government to intervene with the national standards, and we've asked that of the Prime Minister. But it's Premier Ford's responsibility to look after long-term care homes, and he has to get up to the plate, not just ask for money from the federal government. He has a responsibility to do more than that. We're not a cash cow, you know. We're spending a lot of money, and we're accountable for that money as well. So I want to see the Premier do more than just say, to the federal government, well, give me money.
Okay, let's parse that apart. Ms. O'Connell, I want to ask you on the first part of that, the issue of national standards. The Prime Minister has received a number of questions over the past few days, and especially today, based on the letter, about whether or not he and your government really are willing to impose a set of national standards. In no way has he committed to that. And in fact, most of the time he refers to that jurisdictional issue when responding, and also the variance of the problem depending on the province that you live in. Basically, insinuating that it's not the same, let's say you're in BC versus in Ontario and Quebec. What is your response to that? And in your appeal to the Prime Minister, what would you say if he is in fact hesitant to impose any kind of national standards?
Well, I mean, I think the issue of jurisdiction is real. And so I fully understand the Prime Minister's the situation he's in. And I would agree that I'm sure not every single province faces the same issues, but you know, us in Ontario, we are there's very clearly something wrong. And so we think that it is appropriate, or there is a place for the federal government to set standards. And we do it on other things. You know, we set some standards on, it was actually our colleague Gary who said it best, you know, we set standards on the tags in your clothes, the cars that you drive, and it doesn't mean we have to infringe on the jurisdiction of provinces and territories when it comes to the delivery of healthcare. But I think as Canadians, that all of us want to see a level of care across this country. And I wouldn't say that, I think the Prime Minister's comments and concerns were incredibly genuine. And I think he's in a difficult spot in the sense of finding that balance, working with provinces and territories. But I think he's made it very clear, and so is the Minister of Health federally, that he's made it clear that they are going to be at the table, and the Minister of Health has acknowledged in her answers in the House as well that standards need to be higher. So I don't think it's a question of knowing that we need to move forward, but how we do so in a respectful way, to respect jurisdiction, to respect the autonomy of provinces and territories, I think is incredibly a fair approach to take.
I guess I wonder, Ms. Sgro, and you'll know this, being, you know, having been in your role for as long as you have, I can't imagine how that conversation goes with Quebec, right? We've already heard the Premier say we want more money, we don't want strings attached. We've heard Mr. Blanchet many times in the House of Commons arguing for higher, you know, a higher amount of transfers with zero strings attached. How realistic do you think it is?
Well, you know, it's always difficult trying to get into these things because of the jurisdiction, whether we're talking about long-term care or we're talking about the challenges that our cities are facing. But we have to find solutions, and I think together we can work these things out. This is about the most vulnerable people we have in society, and it doesn't matter where they live. We should be able to get Quebec on board with understanding this is important for everyone, and I think they're a caring society like the rest of us, and I would like to think that they would come on board at the end of the day.
I know, Ms. O'Connell, that you guys were also, the group of you were also asking for more action from the province, and Ms. Sgro alluded to it. Since the report was released by the military, the province has taken over 4 of the 5 homes that were highlighted. Does that reassure you?
To some extent, certainly. Keeping the same managers in place, I think, is incredibly unacceptable. But I think that action should have been taken. The second you need to send in the Canadian Armed Forces, the Prime Minister's line about soldiers taking care of seniors should have set off alarm bells about management in the first place. But what I think is really important, what I'm hearing from families, is I don't want anybody to forget that we still have residents living in these conditions. And part of our letter to Premier Ford really highlighted, I think, some areas, or I really want to see an action plan. What's going to happen today, tomorrow, to take care of the people that are still there? Workers who are scared because they don't have enough PPE. In those reports, you hear about residents not being treated properly for whether it's falls or wounds. And so I really want to see, not only I do think it's good to take over the management of these homes, but I want to see what is the government of Ontario going to do to ensure that the people in there right now are getting the care that they need. And then moving forward, you know, continuing with this conversation about standards and inquiries and all of those things. But I don't want anyone to forget that we still have constituents living in there. We still have seniors in these conditions. And I want to see the plan of how Ontario is going to protect these people.
Okay, I have to leave it there. I'm out of time, but thank you very much to both of you for your time. Thanks to Jennifer O'Connell and Judy Sgro.